Hello there.
Hello.
Today we're talking about the CCC framework,
Yep.
not to be confused with the other CCC
We have two
topic
CCCs.
that we talk about. The CCC.
Exactly.
So
And
today
your
it's,
grandmother is CC.
yeah, I'm sure everyone really needed to know that information. She'll won't be watching this, so awesome. So the one we're talking about today, competency, commitment, capacity,
Yes.
not to be confused with.
Character, competency, and connection.
Yes, we love competency.
We do.
Yeah. So
It's a pretty important thing, actually.
little Venn diagram
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So I guess to start on this one, right, defining, right, okay, so for this character, competency, commitment, capacity,
Yeah.
right, we use this as a for people.
Yeah.
Right, we talk about right person, right seat,
Yes.
and this goes along with that.
With the right seat side of it all.
Right seat side, right, making sure that the person fits into that seat.
Yes.
And using this as
comfortably fits in that seat and can grow in that seat and can flourish in that seat and all that good stuff.
and using this to assess and discuss and right having a framework for talking about how are we doing
Yes.
in our current role.
Yes.
So to start,
Mhm.
let's break down the three elements of the CCC,
Sounds brilliant to me.
starting with competency, the
Right.
big one.
Competency has to do with whether or not you have the skills and experiences that are requisite in order for you to be able to execute against the objectives of the seat. Objectives we tend to think about as roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities, right? And so it's really it's that simple, right? Do you have what it takes to be pretty good at ultimately all of the roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities associated with that seat? Obviously, getting into each of those things is there's a Venn diagram here, because ultimately part of that is that as you progress within an organization, in particular, as you step sort of from one stratum to the next stratum in terms of time span of responsibility, you're also talking about, do they have the capacity to execute against those roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities, which is why we have the three C's: competency, obviously commitment, and capacity. And the commitment part of it is, I know we're going fast, but the commitment part of it is, am I committed enough to be able to continuously be good at the things that are required of the seat? Because within a lot of organizations, even though the seat may not actually change in terms of where it is organizationally speaking, in terms of a stratum, seats do become more challenging. If you're in a relatively simple organization that has three departments, let's say one is sales and marketing and customer service, another one's operations, and another one's finance, right? And then let's just say you have a leader. So it's literally 4 people are in the leadership team. Now, go to where we are today, right? Which is where we have 22 people in the upper leadership organization. So you have obviously, a CEO, me, and then we have 5 C-suite members, right? And then we have 16 department heads, right? That seat, that stratum 3 seat, that's the department head seat, is much more complex today than it was 3 years ago. So the stratum associated with a seat has not changed, but the complexity associated with that seat has changed. And so the commitment side here is, are you committed to being able to grow with the seat? And even though in theory, right, it's not like the seats change from one stratum to another. It's just become a much more demanding and complex seat. So that's why we have the 3 things. It's competency, commitment, capacity. Competency is the ability to is the skills and experiences to execute not just the roles, accountabilities, responsibilities, but the associated objectives with the seat. Commitment is the commitment to be able to grow with the seat as the seat grows because the company's growing. And then capacity, which we haven't gotten into really yet, is, we've already talked a little bit about it, it's time span capacity. So, do you have the ability to sort of work on objectives that make sense in terms of the time frame? So, stratum 1 seats have objectives of up to 90 days. Stratum 2 seats are objectives from 90 days to 1 year. Stratum 3 3 are 1 year to 2 years. Stratum 4 is 2 to 5. Stratum 5 is 5 to 10. And so you have the capacity on a time span basis, but you also need to have the intellectual capacity. You need to have the physical capacity, right? The ability to show up and be there and do the work. And then you need to have the emotional capacity to be successful as well. So emotional one's pretty easy, right? It has to do with temperament as much as anything. But, you could be brilliant, but you could be just I don't want to, you could be highly neurotic and really difficult to just be around because you're constantly just like on edge emotionally, and you're saying abusive things, and you're just temperamentally, you're almost impossible to work with. So that's an important thing, is emotional capacity. We tend to call it EQ.
I would have taken a different direction there. But
what would you have done?
Easier way. I think, right, we talk about the personality stuff because you bring up neuroticism. Right?
Yeah.
That's the negative emotion.
Yeah.
Right. If you have someone who's very introverted,
yes,
like a sales role.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be taxing.
Yes.
Right. And so we're not, right. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That quality or that trait.
Yeah.
It's just you're not in the right seat.
Yes.
For that. Right. And so if we get in that situation, it's like, I'm exhausted from just being always on, talking to people all the time, going out, meeting people. It's like, I can't, I got an hour and a half a day in me, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's right.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's just, we got to make adjustments around that. From a hiring perspective, that's probably where the issue started. But right, we get a lot of people who are earlier in their careers and want to do a certain thing, and I test it out, and then they'll be like, that didn't work for me. And then, right. Well, it's usually easy to mold that into something that does work. Yeah. Right. Where they try to go somewhere else. And we've seen people that step into more managerial roles and then temporarily and then step back. Like, I learned not for me. Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. It's a great way of sort of, pointing out some of the subtleties associated with capacity, right? Because, it's, the introvert versus extrovert in a sales position in particular, is a great conversation, as you've pointed out. And over the long run, right, people, you can't pretend to be good at something if you just genuinely don't, if you're just genuinely not wired for it.
You'll be putting in your best work and you're not going to enjoy it. No. So it's like, it's not mutually beneficial.
Right.
Right. If you make that acknowledgement and you make an adjustments accordingly, right, then that helps everybody involved. Yeah. Right? And just sorting things out. Yeah. Certain people plays better, certain roles better. And I always think there's a value in going a whole rabbit hole here. There's a value in taking the path that isn't comfortable. Right. Like the Robert Frost.
Yes.
Path less traveled. Yes. Which to me is path less traveled for you.
Yes.
Generally speaking. Yes. But the one that you're less inclined to take, that's the path that you're going to learn more from.
But right. And this is the huge but. Yeah. And we said, we'll try to avoid doing too much of a rabbit hole here. Yeah. But it's like, there are people. I was literally interviewing an engineering leader yesterday. And he was talking about how if you would have asked him 5 years ago, and he's relatively, mature individual. I don't know his exact age, but but for sure he's well over. He's probably over 40. I don't know, but let's just plus or minus at that age. If you would have asked him 5 years ago, he said he didn't want to be a leader. He didn't want to manage a team. That just wasn't a thing that excited him. He wanted to be an individual contributor, but he sort of found himself in a situation where they said, "Hey, we really need you to, this individual's leaving. We think you could be a good team leader. Would you be up for it?" And he gave it a shot. And then within months, he realized that he really enjoyed helping people grow. And then he got a lot of reinforcement from his people, right? That, hey, you're actually a really good leader. He actually went to a leadership development thing relatively early on. The company did that for him. But he started getting a lot of positive feedback, like, "Hey, man, I really appreciate you, and you've grown immensely as a leader, and I know you've got my back, and you're helping me grow." And he just found all that stuff nurturing and fulfilling. And now, that's who he is. So back to your thing, sometimes you don't know until you go. On the other hand, sometimes you go there and you're like, I really want to be able to focus on my thing, and I want to go back to being an individual contributor. You see this all the time, not all the time, but I can think of a number of cases where there's a founder who ends up saying, I don't want to be the CEO at this level, and so they say, hey, love the company, love where it's going, but I don't want to be the CEO anymore, and I want to just be the CTO, right?
I feel like you see that pretty frequently in terms of there's a lot of examples of that specific case.
Yeah.
Especially in more, software and more technical organizations, right? Where it's we started this because we had we saw an issue, we saw a need, solved the need.
Yeah.
And then once that is done, it's I'm going to take a step back and be self-aware enough to be hey, I'm not going to be the face of this thing. I don't want to keep running with that vision.
Yeah.
I'd rather go on the back end and fix things back there, because that's why I started this in the first place.
And there are a number, I've got a guy in my head right now who there's a number of things that he does that are still very CEO-ish, but he doesn't own that seat. So he's doing things that a lot of CEOs do, but he is the CTO. He's an amazing. I read his stuff every single time, right? So he's a blogger as well. So there's parts of things that he does that looks like a CTO, and then as a CEO, but he doesn't want to be running around doing all that stuff, and he wants to just sort of be focused on the engineering organization, et cetera. So
it's important to have an objective framework where we can have these discussions, and it's not hey, you're not good at this thing, and then that's not going to lead to a healthy conversation.
Right.
But it's let's accurately dissect where the issue lies.
Yeah.
And have an honest, open, right, truthful, civic, and positive, as Chris would say.
Because as we're getting into right now, and once again, I'm geeking out because I think this is a great conversation, right? If someone's struggling, is it about competency, right? Is it about commitment, right? Or is it about capacity? And capacity, as we've talked about, is multi-layered. But, sometimes it is competency. And you're struggling to take on that next level of competency. Sometimes it's commitment. It's I could do this, but I'm not really that jacked about it, right? I'm not that passionate about it. I'm not, I'm not spending, some after hours thinking about how to become better at this. I'm not thinking about becoming better at this, period. As an example, someone says, hey, I'm not committed to becoming a great leader. That's not a thing that really drives me. And then the final one is, okay, and how does this, compare to who you are, not on the competency side, right? Not on the commitment side, but just who are you fundamentally, emotionally, personality-wise, right? Time spent capacity-wise. It's much easier to really provide developmental feedback and support when you understand sort of the whole person and how that whole person fits against the needs of the seat.
And you're able, usually if there is an issue, it's one of the three. You don't really have
other than core values, other than just a cultural fit.
Well, that's a whole separate.
But what's interesting back that gets, I love, and I've never done this before, right? We were thinking about when we started this conversation around, character, competency, and connection versus, let's just say, commitment, competency, and capacity. It's an interesting Venn diagram there, right?
But you're going a little bit left brain, right brain there.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do on the other side. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? But then if you're missing other things on this side, you're a great cultural fit. And we've seen that a lot, right? Where it's we love you. It's not working.
Yeah.
Or it's not going to work, right? And hiring, for example. So going back to the left brain side of things, I feel like whenever there is an issue, it's usually one of the three that stands out.
Yes.
And then you have two that are working, right?
Yeah.
And someone who lacks the competency, but it has the capacity, has the commitment for sure, and really wants it. But it's just there's a struggle there.
Right.
So it does help to be able to have two things hey, you're doing a good part on two of the three.
Right.
Let's go into the one.
Yeah.
So when we do see issues in one of the three, I guess starting with competency here.
Yeah.
Right. What does that look like? How does that situation come about? And then what's the discussion? What are the next steps after figuring out that competency is the issue, for example?
Competency is really a really interesting one. I would submit that, lots of times it's just like we need to work on getting you, upgrading, up-leveling these skills and experiences. But back to commitment capacity, but if someone doesn't just genuinely want to go there, right, that's one thing. Let's talk about another one, which is, maybe the one of the competencies is, you've got to be great at, organization, right? You got to be great at follow through and structuring things. And it's just not like, it's just not something that you're inherently great at. And so, and then the question is, do we think, ultimately this is a competency that you're going to be able to develop? Or let's just throw Colby in here for a second, right? Yeah, you could potentially become really good as a project manager, right? You could potentially become really good as a project manager. You have the intellectual capacity. But is this really something that you're like, is this how you're wired? Is this something you want to become great at? And so having a real honest conversation around, is this a competency you are going to develop without lots of strain, and ultimately one you're not going to be happy being great at, right?
And you're not going to be as good as at it as someone who is more inclined to be in such a position and serve such a purpose.
Yeah. And so ultimately it's like, okay, so yeah, you could do this, but as we talked about a little bit earlier, right? It's going to be a grind. Do you really want to do this? Like, let's just say for the sake of this conversation that you look at the seats and you recognize that 60% of the time, because you look across each of the roles and accountabilities and responsibilities and you say to yourself, these are the 7. And in terms of these 5, being really good at organization and follow through is super important. And that represents 70% of the job. And you just, constitutionally, right? Colby says you're low follow through, but we need high follow through.
Yep.
And so just having an honest conversation with the person about, look, man, we want you to be, we want you to thrive. We want you to just, 80% of the time be in the flow motion where it's a good challenge. You love doing it. You're fully sort of like, lost in terms of time. And the reality is that this seat, it isn't going to be that for you.
Sometimes it's a temporary thing, right? Where someone leaves and we have to fill a need.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, are you good to do this for a quarter?
Yeah.
And it's like, I can do it for a quarter.
Yeah.
But that's right. We have an end goal in mind there.
Yeah.
But if it's like, hey, we're doing a career development thing here, and this is what you think you want to do.
Yeah.
Then that discussion becomes a little bit more important.
And it's interesting too, because you talk about sort of capacity versus competency, right? Think about, we were talking earlier about a salesperson. So let's just say you have someone whose job is predominantly to be out there interacting with humans. That means you like doing that. So you're probably more of an E than an I. And your job entails a lot of ambiguity, and your job entails, a lot of failure, right? So, in that situation, we have 2 tools, right? We talk about like our Jung-Myers tool, which is type coach, right? So introvert versus extrovert, right? And then you have Colby, which helps us understand levels of how one's comfort with ambiguity and risk, right? So if you have an introvert who's extraordinarily uncomfortable with ambiguity and risk, putting them into a seat, a sales organization seat, specifically one that's like, let's out there running around, because we could even go to the 4th element of Colby, which is implementer, right? So whether you would like to be more physically or intellectually active, right? And so let's just say that person, just wants to sit in a chair, right, all day long. They're an introvert and they're uncomfortable with risk. That's not going to work.
With the sales thing, right, we're kind of profiling the classic entrepreneur, right? Where it's like, you got to go do things, be uncomfortable with risk, take all that. And then I know you love the Colby stuff. I always go back to Big 5.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of, you want to be extroverted, you want to be open to experience, you want to be, and then probably low on neuroticism, because stuff's going to happen and you don't really want to take that personally.
Yeah.
And And then it's like, where conscientious is usually a huge factor in the business world. It's like, it's not that much here. It's like, as long as you have enough to just get some pep in your step and keep moving forward, it's like, you're good.
Yeah.
Just keep taking the punches and move forward.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about the age we're in right now, and one of the areas where I'm super optimistic with regard to, what I'll call useful intelligence versus artificial intelligence, right? With regard to AI, right, is just becoming better and better at helping people understand who they are and putting them in positions where they can thrive.
Yeah.
It's
having that data, having that context.
Yeah.
And that's right. We talked about this before this, but right, knowing where you are, where you've been, and then the best path to move forward.
Yeah.
Right. And all of that helps you inform what that path is going to be.
Yeah.
And right, because you learn from your past experiences and then how that interacts with who you are, where you are. Or historically, people kind of do this intuitively, and you do a good job with it because life's hard.
Yeah.
Right. It makes you more welcoming, open to the ways of the world, and then informs who you are and then how you act in certain situations, so that you can move forward and be comfortable with that and be comfortable with that ambiguity.
Yeah.
And also subconsciously know where you want to go and let that take you. But with all this stimulus, all this, everything that's going on in the modern age, it's a lot harder to have that level of introspection and figure those things out, because, right, you can be comfortable if you really want to be comfortable, and you can just not really pay attention to that stuff and live outside of yourself, but also not really live that much at all, kind of a thing.
Right.
And so given that that's sort of the way things are, it's really, really helpful to have these more objective correctives and figure that out and bring people back into themselves and ground them so that we can move forward.
And frameworks for helping people understand themselves.
Yes.
Right. And not just helping people understand themselves, but helping their team leaders understand them. Right. So that they can help their team members, understand who they are, put them in positions where they can be highly successful, where they can develop the confidence that's so super helpful when you're on any journey, right? And then ultimately, so that they are not only confident with regard to who they are and what they're good at and what they like doing, right? But then also, hey, given this, right, I can go this direction with confidence, right? I can pursue this path or this path or this path career-wise because I understand who I am, and those paths are all viable paths for me, right? This is an area where I think, we're just beginning to become really, really good, and it's exciting to me personally. And, we've been working on understanding this stuff for years and years and years, but we've only, this is one of those areas I like to say we're only this far along, but the direction we're going, I think, is going to be super huge and helpful.
The direction is very positive.
Yeah.
And there's momentum there too.
Yeah.
And AI is helping when we use it as a tool.
Yes.
As it's supposed to be used.
Yes.
Right. It's very powerful when we know what to do with it.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things to me is when you have a team, right, and you have people advancing themselves and advancing these things, right, that has effects on the people around them, right, where you're showing how things can work, good behavior, and then, right, also helping others up that ladder. And that's huge.
Yeah. And you look around and people are climbing the ladder and they're doing it with confidence, and right. And they're cheering one another on.
You don't have the crabs in a bucket thing, right? We don't have that.
Yeah. I don't know what that one is,
so
but
it's like you have crabs in a bucket.
Yeah.
And then one of the crabs tries to climb out of the bucket. The other crabs will pull that crab down.
Yeah.
And that comes back to culture.
Yes.
Right. When you have a strong, supportive culture within your organization, within your team.
Yes.
Right. The growth there becomes exponential.
Yeah.
When you have all of these things firing.
It's all those who are sort of in that conventional, right, stage 4, where, this is where they're comfortable, and people leaving it makes them feel uncomfortable because they don't want to do that, right? They're not willing to sort of take on the challenges associated with going from conforming to non-conforming. And part of it is their own fears for themselves. They transpose those on those other people too. So it's not just that they're being selfish, it's that they're afraid of it and they think that this person doesn't understand the risks associated with exiting the bucket.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we can go down huge rabbit holes on this.
Right. You can justify it in a pessimistic sense or the optimistic sense of like, hey, you don't be stupid.
Yeah.
Right. And then we go on a whole thing of what personality traits will make you sort of act that way, right? If you're agreeable, but also more neurotic, right? You're going to be like, don't do that. Yes. I'm scared for you.
Yeah.
Versus if you're disagreeable and competitive.
Yes.
And
right. You can't get out of here.
I'm not letting you do that. Like, you're not doing that.
Yeah. Lots we can talk about, but I am very, I do think like these frameworks, right? Like CCC are extraordinarily useful. They're not perfect. They're all heuristics. Lots of people like to make fun of heuristics, but just because the map is not the territory does not mean the map does not have utility.
Yeah.
And our CCC, we think it's great. We know it's not perfect. Other, operating systems like EOS talks about get it, want it capacity. So they have their own version of this thing. But, the point is, ultimately, I think all organizations would benefit significantly from having decent frameworks that helps them help people understand where they are, what their potential is, and what the associated with paths forward look like, because that just makes it that much better to be a part of that organization, because you feel like you not only matter, but you can continue to matter, and you have excitement about where you're going. I know I've shared it a few times, but the simplest definition of happiness is someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to, right? Love what you're doing, do work that matters, and be excited about the future. You get those three things, pretty strong inside of you, and there will be crappy days, but generally speaking, our wish is 90% of the time you go home at night and you're like, I love or like what I'm doing. I really do. I do.
Good. I think it's a great place to end it.
All right. Thank you.